Hunsaker, aka Focus. He is a mathematician and critical thinker. He's a philosopher and a good friend of mine. He's also a rapper, a veteran of the vegan straight edge hardcore scene here in Salt Lake City, and he has a lot of thoughts on what we're trying to accomplish with the armed leftists and our agenda.
For the most part, I'm a leftist. I've been a leftist the majority of my life. I've explored all different forms of leftism, from Marx to Chomsky, anarcho-collectivism, communism, every type of derivative of the left I've probably looked at and identified with. What I want to talk to you about is, in the last couple of years, I've had kind of an existential crisis in the left. Things that I've seen going on in all sides of political arguments are, when you have PhD scholars that come out with statistical arguments, you can't just ignore them and write them off. You have to embrace them, even if you don't agree with them. And what I've seen a lot of is people misrepresenting those arguments or ignoring those arguments and going with more of a system one type thinking and more of a reactive type thinking towards these arguments and reacting emotionally. I also see that with this new, it's not new, it's old. You and I have been talking about kind of the intersectionality of people for years, right? But the way that intersectionality now is promoted and signaled across all mediums of communication got its constraints and its limits, and it doesn't go without its trade-offs. At what point does that end, So I started reading a lot of more libertarian scholars in the last few years, and trying to deal with some inconsistencies. Like, one of them you've seen is when Bernie Sanders was running for president. I lived in Sugar House at the time. And there was a petition to move the homeless shelter to Sugar House, and I saw people with Bernie Sanders signs in their windows and no shelter in Sugar House signs in their windows.
Right.
And it's like, let's save the poor, but they can't come to my neighborhood. We're down for black people as long as they don't live by us, right? We want felons to vote, but we don't want to give you jobs, right? So it's, and the thing I love the most is, we want socialism, but I do everything in my power to not pay taxes, right? So to kind of deal with some of these inconsistencies, I really dove into the right for the last couple of years. I never really identified as a person on the right, but I did start to identify with some things in the Libertarian Party. I did start to look at some arguments that libertarians had that were coherent. And I started to explore this whole paradigm from first order principles, all the way down to John Rawls versus Robert Nozick, all the way down to John Stuart Mills, all the way down to Thomas Paine versus Edmund Burke. I started reading a lot of authors like Thomas Sowell, a very conservative author, very smart, very intelligent, and he had some arguments that I couldn't really just push back against if I was using logic and if I wasn't reacting emotionally. So I had an existential crisis, and what I want to talk to you about is, I feel that if you're an intellectually honest person on the left, and your aim is really truth, right? Your aim is, and I don't want to say truth, let's not say truth.
You're saying your aim is resolution.
Right, because truth, I'm not necessarily a postmodernist, but I kind of agree with Richard Rorty and the fact that I think truth is more of a function. I'm more of a pragmatist in that way, right? I'm definitely not a logical positivist in terms of truth, but resolution, effectiveness. I don't think that just posting your opinion all the time on social media has the aim of being effective. I think that you're just signaling people that agree with you so you can all agree together, right? It's like if you studied Sartre, when he talked about the professor when France was occupied, there was a professor that hung up the French flag during the Nazi occupation.
Yeah.
And the Nazis came in, the Gestapo came in, they tore down the flag and they pulled them out. Sartre called that a gesture, but it wasn't effective in resolving everything.
Right.
There was no resolution. So I had a real existential crisis, and I stopped identifying with the left for a while. I didn't identify with the right, so to say, but I kind of stopped identifying with the left. And I've come back to that.
Yeah.
I'm a leftist.
Sure.
I'm a Rawlsian leftist. I believe that inequality is justified as long as we give the worst off the greatest good possible. I don't think the aim should be for everyone to have everything equally. I think we have tried that in society. If we're honest about that, it hasn't worked. But reading a lot of behavioral economics, people like Daniel Kahneman, right? It's psychologically proven that if you live in poverty, the worst things that happen to you are not the worst things that happen to people with money. If you live in poverty and you have a toothache, the amount that you suffer is great. And I want to fight against poverty. I don't know if I'm going to become Peter Singer. That's the aim I want to choose. Now, we have to be honest if we look at this. So the most oppressed and poor people in the United States of America. Let's talk about the most, I don't know, who could be the most, like, underprivileged person in the United States of America? Like
Native American reservations.
Okay, people that live on Native American reservations. Right. And let's say you live on Native American reservation and you could even be oppressed within that reservation. You could even have beliefs that are counterculture to the Native American reservation ways and be even more oppressed.
Right.
You're still in the top 4% of global earners, right? So the one thing I'd really like to look at more is global poverty, right? Global poverty. I don't think the leftists do enough. We talk about a lot that's going on in our country and our neighborhoods, and this is definitely unjustified, right? But the poorest neighborhoods are still in the top 3% compared to the global poverty level. And to give the devil its due, these billionaires like Gates and Buffett are doing more to help global poverty than the government is. Right? And is it the government's job to address global poverty, right? And these are questions that I want to ask, honestly, right? I want to have a deep, sound, intellectual conversation about it. Because if it comes down to me identifying with the left, but that gets counterintuitive to the fight against global poverty, then I'm going to choose the fight against global poverty, because that's the thing I want to look at. There's studies that say a homeless teenager is going to become a drag on society. Most homeless teenagers that don't find a place to live end up in jail, end up addicted to drugs, and end up on, becoming part of the welfare state, and could be potential burdens. And that was a homeless teenager that went to jail, was addicted to heroin, was on the street, blah, 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 and came out of that. I'm very sympathetic to that. So I want to fight global poverty. I don't think that every situation to address those means is going to happen within a partisan universe. There were, rich people, feudal lords, rulers, landowners, blah, 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 for most of civilization. And we can discount the claim that I have on that for hunter-gatherer civilization. So, let's just say that the wealth accumulation of people was pretty much constant and flat for most of human society.
Yeah.
This extraction you talk about, the Industrial Revolution,
Right.
shot it up. I mean, that's like, as an econ undergrad, when I was taking my first economics class, it's one of the first things you learn.
Right.
And it's bittersweet because it's a result of kind of Enlightenment principles.
Yeah.
Of Enlightenment thinking that came from Europe.
There's progressivism in there,
right,
too.
which had awesome things about it. It's what separated church from state initially. It's what did a lot of these things, but it also had a lot of trade-offs.
Yeah.
This extraction.
Yeah. Well, that's why that was
racial slavery. A lot of these. So, I don't pretend to have the solutions for all these problems.
Right.
I have a hard time when a lot of my fellow leftists do. If they were intellectually honest, they don't, and I'm critical of that. I love AOC, man. Cortez is great. I love what she's doing.
Sure. Right.
Okay? And let's talk about some ad hominem arguments. Let's talk about some straw man arguments. Let's talk about logical fallacies here for a minute.
It's 18.
Right? As a white male leftist.
Yeah.
Right? So, I identify as male because I guess that's a choice now. Right? Whatever. I don't care. I don't have a dog in that race, so I'll go with that. I'm male. Society identifies me as white. I didn't pick that.
Right.
You know what I mean? And politically I identify with the left. I start to see how you're giving the right ammunition when a case like this happens.
Mm-hmm.
So AOC, I love AOC. I think she's great. And she said some things like, I didn't go support Bernie because I was taking some me time or whatever, that people might have had an opinion on. And if I said, I have an opinion on that, well, that's when you can use the argument like, well, you're a white male.
Yeah.
Maybe you shouldn't be telling like Native women what to do.
Sure.
Totally got that. Cool. We're in alignment there. Are we in alignment there?
Yeah.
Right? It's not for me, Mr. like conservative Christian whitey, to tell you how to live your life.
Right.
We are in agreement there.
Doesn't keep them from trying to do that.
The Green New Deal. Yeah. I wasn't impressed with it. Everyone thought it was so great. Most of the people that thought it was so great haven't even read the damn thing.
Yeah.
It's 2 pages. And to me it was more like, this is great, but it doesn't say anything about fixing the solution. I was critical of the Green New Deal. Now, I support it in sentiment. I support it in spirit. But it didn't propose anything.
Right.
And when I said that, the argument comes up, well, you're a white male. Well, hold on. That's a straw man argument because I'm not criticizing the way you live. I'm not criticizing the choices you make as a person of color, as someone that identifies female.
You're making an honest assessment of the plan itself.
Of someone's work.
Right.
I need to be able to be critical of someone's claims.
Sure.
It doesn't matter if you're a, lesbian, Jewish, black woman, I guess lesbian and woman could be, I don't know if that's like a,
Yeah, you could say
Am I being like inconsistent there?
No,
I don't know. But if you tell me 2 + 2 = 5, I'm going to disagree with you.
Right.
It has nothing to do with privilege. It has to do with the system of math that we've agreed upon in all the world, right? So, and for anyone that could potentially listen to this, yes, I've taken real analysis, linear algebra, tons of discrete math classes in college. I know that there are cases where you can make those numbers add up. I'm not talking about them. Because when I'm having a conversation with someone in reality, in the real world, no one's using modular arithmetic or all these things. So, smartasses, I'm not addressing that, right? 2 + 2 = 4, because we've agreed upon that. Now, I feel that like sometimes when I'm critical of people's statistics, there was a scholar, she's a PhD candidate, she's real cool, man, but she said something about like we haven't had an average temperature in the last 15 years or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Now, as a statistician, that doesn't mean anything to me. I don't know what that argument means. Now, I know the spirit of the argument.
Yeah.
The spirit of the argument is like shit's getting hotter, colder. Like we're standard deviations from the means are going crazy.
Yeah.
But if I take, three numbers, let's say 7, 6, and 2, right? And I take the average, right, of those numbers. So 7, 6, and 2, 15 divided by 3. The average is 5, right? You might not have, and I'm using a very elementary clip, an average doesn't mean that anything in the space that you are measuring converges to that average, right? All an average is exactly that. It's what we call an unbiased estimator in statistics.
Right.
It doesn't mean you can take a bag of rice, take the average size of rice in that bag. It doesn't mean that any particular set element of that set of rice is on the average. And in fact, when you get into continuous measurements, it's impossible to have anything hit the average because you don't have anything that converges to a point on that continuous measurement, right? Something like weather, because you do it by taking areas of things, and that goes to zero. It's hard to explain this. It's even hard to explain this just now, like talking with you, listening and like paying attention, without losing interest and things like that. But I want to encourage my people on the left to look at these ways of arguing.
Yeah. Naturally.
Think carefully about this, because a lot of intelligent leftists are starting to question their commitment.
Yeah.
I know global warming is, I have a 99% certainty that global warming is man-made, human-made, is real, right? I don't need a shoddy statistic that can be picked apart to show that.
Right.
Now, I understand what people do, but the media does this. The media ruins statistics all the time.
Yeah.
And with this whole social media thing, we're becoming just like that. We're throwing out random things to get views, to signal, to get attention. And I question that. I question the authenticity of that. Now, I agree. What do we do about poverty? Like, do we want to look at it from a capitalist perspective? I would agree that a lot of cases, no, we don't. Do we have a pure socialist system that has worked at scale? I would also say I don't see one.
Yeah.
And
True.
I'm not, and people are like the Soviet Union wasn't truly Marxist. I don't know. It coincides with a lot of Marx that I've read.
Right.
I'm not a Marxist any longer, so I don't have any weird attachment to that.
That's authoritarian left too.
Right. I'm definitely not down for the authoritarian left. But that begs the question: could China make a decision to fight global warming faster than the U.S.? Yes. Why? Because they're authoritarian.
Yeah. True.
If Chinese leaders all of a sudden want to cut back, which they're 30% of contributions.
They are.
America's 15%. Now, per capita, we're a lot larger. We have a lot more consuming power, blah, 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 blah.
Sure.
That I drove my car here. You know what I mean?
Right.
And, we don't even need to get into the cases where if you're trying to feed your family, you're not thinking about
No, absolutely.
the sky. So that's why I always bring it back to poverty, right? I always bring it back to poverty.
Yeah. Subsistence.
Yes, subsistence. I'm a Rawlsian, right? I'm a Rawlsian where I believe in the difference argument. I don't believe that inequality is necessarily bad. as long as the worst off have the greatest good.
Yeah.
The greatest good that we can possibly make for the worst off.
Right.
I also question the welfare system. A lot of my friends got mad at me because I like Andrew Yang. I'm a fan of UBI. I don't think people should have to justify why they want subsistence. They shouldn't have to have any testing.
Right.
Right? And UBI, if you look at it, was also, people call it socialism on the right, but Friedrich Hayek, Milton Friedman, all liked UBI. Different forms, but it was all they were proponents of universal basic income.
Yeah.
Milton Friedman in the form of negative income tax, right? So these are the things that I had to go and read these things. I had to go read a bunch of other sides of the argument.
So if you were to like give a reading list for fellow leftists, what would that be?
A reading list? I would say, I don't know that you necessarily need to read like Anarchy of the State and Utopia by Nozick, or A Theory of Justice by Jonathan Rawls. But I think that everyone should study the debate between Rawls and Nozick. I think that everyone should study the debate between Burke and Thomas Paine. I think a good conservative author to read is Thomas Sowell. I think that he's careful about how he does his studies. Here's an example. So it kind of took me, it was tricky. And I do this to my left friends all the time. We'll talk about, privilege, white privilege, things like that. And I will say this just to see what kind of reaction I get, And this is true, right? You can check this statistically. I say, well, the highest earners in the United States are Asian on average. It's not white men. It's Asian people, right? And I get all kinds of crazy answers from that. I get answers like, well, a lot of people consider Asians white. A lot of, those aren't true. You did bad statistics. I get all kinds of weird answers from that.
Sure.
And it took me a minute because I see cats like Ben Shapiro and Dinesh D'Souza and these smart conservatives.
Yeah.
When you start thinking they're dumb because they're conservative, you've already lost.
Yeah. That's
right?
True.
Right?
Yeah.
To me, that's like two boxers fighting, one loses. You say they're non-athletic.
Yeah.
That's just not true.
Yeah.
Right? So, I struggle with this argument. Now, what I had to do is I had to look deeper into this argument. Now, here's the fun fact, Adrian. You're going to love this. Asian people are the highest paid people on average. In fact, Asian women are pretty much above, in a lot of cases, white men. In a lot of places they converge, right? We could get deep into what was controlled for and everything, but we don't need to for this argument to make its point. We're asking the question, well, does that mean, if white privilege is real, why are Asians the highest paid in the country, right? Now, instead of reacting emotionally, we should look at that argument. We should dissect that argument. Because you look at Asian doctors versus white doctors, the average white doctor actually makes more than the average Asian doctor, right? So, and the average male doctor makes more than the average female doctor, right? So, that means that there's more Asian doctors. So what that means is, on average, right, Asians work a lot fucking harder, right? Does that mean that there are more opportunities for Asians? No. In fact, if we're going to go off of a affirmative action debate, you're less likely to get into a good college because you're Asian. Because you're overrepresented. Right? So I would look at that argument and I would say, okay, yes, on average Asians make more than white people, right, in the United States. Okay. However, does that mean that they're provided more opportunity? Well, the fact that on average in these professions that we control for, engineering, right, doctors, blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
Well, no, white people on average have higher salaries. So what it means is that Asian people take up more of those professions,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't mean that there's more opportunity, that there's equal opportunity or anything like that.
It doesn't mean
right?
that there's more privilege given to them.
Right.
Right.
Animosity towards Jewish people was generated back in the 1920s and 30s.
If I'm correct, I should.
I believe that was the sentiment.
Right.
But I'm just kind of agreeing with you in spirit from things I recall reading.
Right. Well, they were like you said, same situation, smaller section of the population, but more of them were in these professions that put them in that position. I think that not just leftists, but everybody has a firm grasp of the rational aspects of what these issues really mean and represent, whether it's poverty, climate change, or racism, or any of those things. As I stated, you know, they are not partisan by their nature. We make them partisan because
Yes, absolutely. And when you start going away from that, when you start trying to seek the principle that you are trying to have some sort of resolution on,
right.
you start to see that sometimes the other party has some good points. And then when you agree with those points, you got to be able to agree with those points without being called out, because you're not being a dogmatic leftist, to where if you don't agree with everything, you're all of a sudden not a real leftist, or you're not just like you know, I know there's plenty of pro-choice Republicans, and I know there's plenty of pro-life leftists. You know, don't even want to get into that debate. That's one I have a hard time with. I'm sympathetic to women's choice, but you know, not going into that debate, but just saying that just because you are on one side of the spectrum doesn't mean that you fully align with everything in it. And I think now, at a time more than ever, if you question anything, and especially on the left, and I mean, I was making records, you've listened to them. I was talking about white privilege as a white dude, you know, in like 2001.
Yeah, I remember that.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
In like 2001, right?
Yeah.
And nobody want to hear it then. All the people that I was arguing with then now are all like, you know,
Yeah,
they've all come, right. But like I've made a joke, like, you know, white people lecturing other white people about white privilege is like hipsters calling other hipsters hipsters.
That's absolutely true.
You know what I mean? Like, what I had to come to realize is, like, yeah, just because you know about it doesn't change anything.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that I'm just gonna grovel, right? Like, you know, I'll be in line with some aspects of reparations and resolution, but they have to be logically coherent.
They have to be logically correct.
Yeah, they have to actually be effective too. I'm not just going to throw money at something just to signal that I'm morally in line with you. If you are sound and coherent with your narrative, your research and your data, you're not going to get pissed off.
No.
You know? Like when a Ben Shapiro type, who is also an amazing debater, right? People like have to, you know what that guy does is he studies left-wing arguments, and he'll argue the point of view of the left with his colleagues. So did Scalia did that. Judge Scalia, right? Most right-wing person you can think of.
Yeah.
He would take the left point of view just to argue it.
Yeah.
So he could get to know it better and disarm it and deconstruct it better. It's kind of like a lawyer trick, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know, never been to law school, but it sounds like some lawyer shit, right?
Yeah.
You know, next time he says something like, well, if white privilege is real, Asians are paid more, blah, 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 I say that's a straw man.
Yeah.
And I can point out why, or it's not homonym argument, whatever, right? But I can point out why, and I don't need to get mad.
Right.
I can dive into these things. I don't see a bunch of math and then get frustrated.
Yeah.
You know, I don't see a bunch of like statements that don't agree with me but have some logical consistency to them, so I get mad and I'm just like, well, screw you.
Right.
You're a white male. You don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
That's like the worst thing you can do in that situation. Cats like Jordan Peterson are making careers off that shit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you know, I'm very aware I'm a white male. I've been talking about this for years.
Yeah.
I've acknowledged the privilege of being a white male
Right.
for fucking years, you know? And I've also argued with, like, you know, people in college, well, you know, that are calling me a white male while I'm paying for college and they're on a scholarship, right? Like, it's easy to get defensive.
Yeah.
So I'm in agreement, man. People of color don't have to justify that they're oppressed. They don't have to justify these things. If you want to have a resolution, though, it involves discussion. Your discussion should have some logical coherence to it,
Yes.
right? And as soon as you just get frustrated and throw out that you're a white male, especially when it comes from another white dude, that cracks me up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you know, I can't tell you how many times I've tried to agree with people on the left. I'm agreeing with them in a different way, maybe with a caveat, but I'm agreeing with them, and they get frustrated and say, you're a white male.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, great.
The era of social media, right? We get a lot of shit thrown at us every day in our news feeds, right? Friends have opinions and all this sort of thing, but we don't give ourselves the time to mentally masticate on those things as a means of intellectually processing them, just to somehow dismiss it in some sort of way. Well, that's white privilege, or
On the
that's,
right, they call you a libtard.
yeah, they
or
call you
say,
libtard, but
you
that's
know,
communism or something
right,
like
that's
that. It's just a way
yeah.
to dismiss it
You see,
and absolve
people,
yourself of the argument.
Right, example, they're always saying that Andrew Yang, they're always saying, yeah, UBI is socialism. When you had Ben Shapiro even say no, right? This is something that Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek talked about, like the godfathers of like libertarianism, right? Like free market capitalism.
Right.
So I'm just being critical of the left more because that's where I'm from.
Right.
The right does this too.
Attacked.
And also, let's note that if someone has a sound argument,
Yeah.
you're also going to look at it.
Right. Well, think
Because
critically about it. Sure.
there is a high probability, I don't know about you, but there's a high probability that I'm not looking at this correctly.
Right.
That the way I view this narrative, the research I've done, has a lot of self-seeking bias, has a lot of different
Same.
types of bias.
Yeah, same.
So, you know, that's important. We can't discount, you know, when a black libertarian or a libertarian of color, right, tells me, hey, white boy, we don't have any reason to trust the government. And I'm like, I agree. And he's like, so why would I vote for more government?
Right.
I need to have a better argument than like, well, Hillary Clinton's going to save black people. Yeah, that's a bunch of bullshit. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, that's like, yeah, really? Like, Bill Clinton's the one that freaking privatized the prison system, yo.
He did.
You know what I'm saying?
Well, that was the whole idea behind the blog, is to sort of initiate, or at least try and get people on the street level to begin to do this. Because people at an academic level can do this all day, but it may never. But there's some people on the street level that don't have access to that.
Right.
And so they're living in a reactionary world. You know what I mean? And then so if we can educate ourselves on that street level, have that sort of knowledge right here, out in the community, then I think then we're less susceptible to being driven by our emotions when it comes to these politically significant issues and that directly affect us and our communities. Like, we can begin to think and bring this type of logic to our communities in a fashion that isn't invasive,
Right.
but can be synthesized into the movement itself. Like, I'm thinking in terms of Native communities mostly.
And that's amazing to me.
Yeah. Can we create a synthesis of these things?
I don't know. I
Yeah.
mean, this is
That's the challenge.
right.
Though,
That's
right?
and that, but that those three words right there should be said more about more people.
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
Because that is not something that you and I can just talk about and signal on Facebook,
Right.
like throw some memes up,
Right.
and then like feel good about it. Like that involves you and I and other people from a community sitting down, and then we agree, okay, so we agree, now we have to build some shit.
Right.
Now we got to do some writing, we got to do some math, we got to do some statistics, we got to do some policy, we got to do some computer programming,
Yeah.
and that's like what I want to align with.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we can do it, but I know I want to align with it. I know that because I protested for years, right?
Yeah.
I protested for years. I don't know what good it did.
Yeah.
Like I question. I would like to see some studies on like how effective protests are
Right.
now. Not in the 60s and 70s when they
Right.
actually like really did shit, but
Yeah.
like now, right?
Yeah.
So, well, now that it's more like kind of virtue signaling,
Yeah.
or moral posturing, as
Right,
people
yeah.
would say. Occupy Wall Street for me was an example of like a protest that I don't even know where people were trying to go with it.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like at least Black Lives Matter. I know what they're trying to say.
Sure.
I know what people are looking for. Now, you get all kinds of different like emotions and agendas and stuff that start to align with that. But Occupy Wall Street, the challenge I have with that is like, okay, the 1% of the 1%. Well, then we come down to globally. I'm like, well, 2/3 of you are the 1% of the global,
Right.
right? Right? You and I are probably top 2% globally, right? And we're like middle class, maybe towards upper middle class Americans, right? And I don't know, like, sometimes, like, if people are just protesting because they're pissed off. I know I was.
Yeah.
How many animal rights protests I did, how many different types of protests I did, and I don't know what came out of them. You know what I mean? And then you get people like, well, you don't have the right to bitch if you're not going to do something about it. You're not going to. So I'm like, well, I just want to do something different, right? So,
Right.
but anything that involves like work, that's not emotionally charged,
Yeah.
that involves that type 2 thinking,
Yeah.
I'm finding that on both sides, no one wants to do it.
Right. It's hard work.
Right.
It's hard work.
So I've decided I'm going to start tutoring math to like disenfranchised kids instead of like giving them money,
Right.
right? I'll give my money to like people that are dying from malaria,
Yeah.
and I will go to disenfranchised schools and tutor them and give them my time,
Right.
because I'm seeing it's more effective in the long run.
Right.
It doesn't end global poverty, but you know,
But it's on the ground level.
it's got a small result.
Right.
Hey, yo, so there you have it. That was my homie, Aaron Hunsaker, aka Focus. Good conversation. I hope you gleaned a lot from it. And, you know, what we're really trying to do with the Armed Leftists is establish a street level, politically informed movement that is armed with proper facts and proper arguments that substantiate and lend credence to a solutionary approach to social issues and socioeconomic conditions that are, you know, frequently framed in a way that are partisan when they really shouldn't be. And, you know, I want everybody, you know, on the left and on the right to think critically about these things. As I said before, the armed leftist is to antagonize critical thought and, you know, circumvent any sort of reactionary arguments that are, you know, filled with logic fallacies and holes and stuff like that, and really speak more to a divisiveness than they do anything else. We want a solution. We want these problems solved. And it's not just going to come from one political spectrum or the other. It's going to come from everyone as a community. So stay strapped, you know, be good, take care of each other. Peace out.